All right. Hey, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Hope you had a good Easter and enjoyed your time with your family. We are now back, and I'm kind of crooked here, guys. There we go. And this will be 9D, if I'm accurate with A, B, C, and D. And today we're going to talk about traumatic brain injury, or TBI. And that's all this lecture is going to cover, will be the TBI. I think it's important because you will have kiddos in your classroom, children that you maybe have in Sunday school. If you teach dance, you're going to have these kids that will be different than what you remembered. So let's talk about traumatic brain injury. As we begin, we're on page 162 of the PowerPoint, and we are looking at the bottom slide, Chapter 9, Traumatic Brain Injury. Okay, let's get started. A traumatic brain injury is a sudden trauma to the brain that causes some injury. And concussions make up about 75% of TBIs, and vehicular accidents make up about 50% of that. Now, when we talk about vehicular, it can be a car, it could be a wave runner that you are on out in the lake. It could be a skateboard, sort of a vehicle. It could be a snowmobile. It could be one of those four-wheelers that you go on as you go up and down hills and different things. But vehicular means any type of vehicle. But we also know that in children and in the geriatric population over the age of 75, the most common cause for a traumatic brain injury, a concussion, is a fall. Children aren't steady on their feet, and as we get older, we're not steady on our feet as well. Another cause can be domestic abuse and violence. You have shaken baby syndrome, unfortunately. And you think about the brain in the skull and the baby being shaken, and the brain is going forward against the skull, back against the skull, laterally against the skull, and you can end up with more of a global traumatic brain injury under those circumstances. Not everybody is going to recover the same. Younger individuals maybe recover a bit better than us older folks. But it depends on the age of onset. It depends on your age, your health condition overall. If you have other health conditions that are causing you problems, then that traumatic brain injury can just compound that. Also, your ability to get rehabilitation. If you live in a remote area and it takes you 2 hours to get to the hospital for rehab, you're maybe not going to get there quite as often, and so your rehab may not be as good. So rehabilitation is very important as well. Traumatic brain injuries frequently result in speech and language impairments. And as I go through and talk about the characteristics that we see in our children, you're going to say, golly, that sounds like ADHD, or that sounds like they could be on the spectrum, or some other disability, because brain injury. Remember, cognition and language run together, and we've had a cognition injury. So keep that in mind. We have two types of a severe TBI. One is a closed TBI, and that means that the movement in the brain was against the skull, and it can be a fall, it could be you're riding in a car and your head hits the dashboard, or you hit the windshield, or you hit the side glass in the door. So it could be from a car accident, or you're just hit with some object. And that's called a closed TBI. We have a penetrating TBI, And that could be the result of a gunshot wound, some sharp object that penetrates into the brain. So we have two types of TBIs that we're going to be aware of. In the school system, and many of you will end up in the school system, which is why I'm talking about this, and it applies to speech therapists, and I will connect that to a therapy component. But in the school system, most schools will have some type of traumatic brain injury protocol, and that means they have some way, some plan in place as to how they deal with that. Now, I did go online and I looked up some different checklists that they use. This checklist for traumatic brain injury came from Minnesota Department of Education. It's a 2-page type of checklist, and they're wanting medical documentation from a doctor that says, oh yes, this was a TBI. They're looking for functional impairment. They also want to know what the child, in a very basic way, what the child was like prior to the TBI. So pre-existing conditions. Now, that may be, I had a thing pop up on my screen. If you have a child who does have ADHD and is impulsive and fidgety and has trouble sitting and paying attention, a TBI will exacerbate that problem. It may be even worse, but it is important to know what the child was like prior to the TBI. And they will be reviewing the information for eligibility for services in the school system, IEP, 504, however they can provide services for that child. Now here's one that is just a single page. Just a single page. Not sure where this came from, but they're looking at physical symptoms, and then they have a list that you can check under that. Cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, and sleep disturbances. So they're checking those off. Here's another one that's traumatic brain injury checklist. This came from Virginia school system, and it is several pages long. And they're getting into areas of orientation and attention to activity, starting, changing, and maintaining activities, taking in and retaining information, language comprehension and expression, so forth. So this one is a little bit longer in this particular school system. I did run across one that was almost a handbook for traumatic brain injury. It gave a description or a definition. It had a picture of the brain and arrows going to different parts of the brain that cause different disabilities. It was very, very in-depth. And each school system should have some protocol, some checklist, some form that they're using, and something to follow. It's to help with the liability, and it helps to take action quickly for that child. The emergency medical staff that comes upon an accident, probably first or second, they have to quickly assess the injuries and how severe they are so that they know what kind of medical care to give. And they will be assessing a concussion or a brain injury right away as well. And they may use what we call the Glasgow Coma Scale. There it is right there. Let me straighten it up for you. Glasgow Coma Scale. And they're looking at eye-opening responses, verbal responses, and motor responses. Then they're assigning a number rating, and they're going to add those ratings up. Just like with APGAR scores that we talked about at 1 minute, 5 minutes for the newborn. If they get a score of 8 or less, it's a severe head injury. 9 to 12 score, would be moderate. 13 to 15 would be a mild head injury. If the person is in a coma and non-responsive, it means there's no eye opening, no ability to follow commands, and no word verbalizations. So they can then dispatch this information to the emergency room and provide appropriate treatment very quickly. If you watch sports, professional sports, you're going to notice that if a player gets hit and he's down and he's not moving, the medical team, they rush out to the field and they're going to assess him very, very quickly. And then he sort of begins to move. They get him up, they're asking him questions, they get him to the sideline, and they're going to assess the potential for a concussion or a TBI. They're using some protocol, some plan. If it's severe enough or significant enough, they're going to take him to the locker room. We know repeated concussions and head injuries result in long-term neurological deficits later in life. And I do think that pro sports, they're trying to do a much better job of assessing that so that doesn't happen, because the outcome can be pretty staggering for some individuals who have had numerous concussions. So we have ways to assess that, and that's important for a child or for an adult or anybody's loved one. Now, in school, we have to think about, well, what does this head injury result in? What does the child look like? Manifestations of a TBI by age include, for a preschooler, there could be increased irritability and crying. The child's just overstimulated, they're uncomfortable, they may have some pain, but they're just irritable. You can't calm them down. They can't self-soothe, and they're crying a lot. You may see increase in temper tantrums, increased frustration, fearlessness, and as we present more language information, we begin to see the effects, and it gets worse. If we get into elementary school, difficulty learning new information, short attention span and impulsivity, that kind of looks like our attention deficit kids, frustration, inappropriate social interactions. Now you should know what that is. That's pragmatics, inappropriate social interactions. And again, the deficits begin to rear their ugly heads when we expect them to do more language material. When we get into middle school and high school, again, learning new information, short attention span and impulsivity, executive function deficits. Now remember, that's the frontal lobe. That's what keeps you organized. That's what helps you to stay current. You know what's going on. You know when a project is due. You know when a test is coming up. It helps you stay organized. And there are executive function issues, especially if the frontal lobe took a big part of the brunt of the accident. They're depressed, frustrated. They have decreased social judgment. They may be sexually promiscuous. We have to really watch these middle school and high school kids closely because of suicide. And that is a constant fear. So what happens as a result of some of these deficits and behaviors? Definitely, it's a different child. And friends don't know how to deal with the person that they knew as funny and outgoing and wanted to be with people and go to movies. And maybe that isn't the child that's there right now. So friends may kind of go off on the wayside. Friends are going to be talking about the child. Families mourn the loss of the child they had. They're very happy to have this child alive, but this isn't the child they had before the accident. Teachers become frustrated because they don't know how to help them. And the child is at risk for isolation from peers. They have academic failure. They may resort to substance abuse, inappropriate sexual behavior, delinquency, and because they're big risk takers, another TBI. Another TBI. So you're seeing a totally different child than the child that you had in your classroom. You, as the classroom teacher, will be vital to a team of professionals in the school who will make some big decisions about an IEP, a 504. You, as the teacher, you know what that child was like before. You know what their study skills were. You know what their capability academically was. They were great spellers. They were great readers, and they're not now. And so it's very frustrating. How do I help them? You need to keep in close contact, with the family. You need to be on the same page. This is what we're going to work on. And keep them posted, keep the families posted on progress. The parent may see different symptoms at home because home is our comfort zone. So they may see some different symptoms that they need to share with you. Likewise, you need to share with them what you're seeing. But as we think about reentry, especially in elementary school, and this holds true for children who don't have to change classes. You may want, as the teacher, to set up times when the child at home can Skype with the classroom. We have all kinds of ways to do that through WebEx and Zoom, and I just recently learned of Edpuzzle. And it's important for the children in the classroom not to be afraid of the child who enters back into your classroom. Talk to the children about, okay, is this kiddo going to come back in a wheelchair? Is this kiddo going to be on a walker? Is this child going to be able to play outside at recess? They need to have some connection so they're not afraid. And give them time to ask questions and talk to the teacher. Maybe you can talk with the parents and have the parents come in, because it's so important for those children in your classroom to embrace them. So we're looking at reentry, and we know that sometimes the effects don't show up until a little bit later when the language load increases. Think about the early elementary grades. They're learning to read. And now we're in the upper elementary, middle school, and they're reading to learn. And this child doesn't comprehend well. So you have to be creative in your approach to what you can do for them. Now, you're not alone because you have other resource teachers. You may want to talk with the parents and have the parent talk to the doctor. You may get a consent release signed so you can talk to the doctor. How can we best bring this child back into my classroom and work on the language skills that they were so good at? And they eventually know, I'm not good at this anymore. And therein lies more frustration. So you have to make a decision about an IEP or a 504. You have to come up with some strategies and some goals as to how you're going to teach that child. Is the child going to come to school just half day? Maybe for an hour? Maybe for just specials? Is he going to have assignments that are shorter or altered? Does he need extra breaks? These kiddos, neurologically damaged kiddos, they fatigue. They fatigue, just like the child with the hearing loss, significant hearing loss, or vision loss. They fatigue. It takes great effort to concentrate. They may have to have a child take notes for them. You as the teacher may have to to change your teaching style a little bit. And maybe that's okay, because you may have other kids in your classroom who can benefit from that as well. They maybe didn't participate in speech and language prior to the accident, but now we see, oh my gosh, they maybe do need speech and language therapy. Well, ask the speech pathologist to assess them, because speech therapists work on cognition, language, figurative language, higher level language skills. We are well equipped and well versed to be able to do that. Work with the speech pathologist, work with the resource teacher, work with the parents. The child may need physical therapy because they're not walking well. And so have the physical therapist come in and talk to the kiddos in the classroom. More headaches, seizures. Make sure you prepare that classroom for a potential seizure. They may be very emotional, and they may cry and they don't even know why they cry. You may see unpredictable behavior and aggression. So be careful. You're going to know what the behavior was like before and now, and you're going to be able to make a list of both of those situations so that you can share that information with the people who need to know it. I encourage you not to talk about the child in the lounge or with others, especially in the hallway. It's a violation of HIPAA. You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Be respectful of what these families are going through. Don't judge them for what they do or don't do. You may think the parents are coddling them too much. Well, parents are dealing with the emotions and maybe not thinking clearly, and it's easy for us to stand outside that situation and look in and pass judgment. But be careful. Be careful with your judgment. Parents are hurting, and it's a highly emotional situation. They're going to lots of appointments, lots of medical terminology, and they still don't have the child that they had. And that's very upsetting to them. So we do what we do. We do what we can do, and we pull out all our tricks from that bag, and we put our best foot forward for that child. Anything that you do is never wasted on a child, so always keep that in mind. So that's my little spiel about TBI. We will now begin on strokes, and that's page 164. We'll get into strokes or cerebral vascular accidents. We're going to cover just a little bit of information, maybe, on language disorders of unknown origin, but we really don't have a whole lot left to cover. We've touched on most of the other topics. One topic I definitely want to share with you is Fragile X syndrome, and I'll have information for that. I don't think it will be a lot, but you're going to see some kiddos potentially in your classroom with Fragile X who haven't even been diagnosed. So I want you to be prepared for that. I want you to be the best you can be in that classroom to help that child. And Fragile X syndrome goes undetected many, many, many times. So it kind of gives you an idea of like, oh, okay, this is why this child acts this way. Or, maybe we need to do some testing. But you have your information, and that empowers you to help the child and to help the family. Embrace that family. Use them as an important part of the team. Okie dokie, I'm going to sign off, and then I'm going to try and upload. See you the next time. Bye.